why aren't corporate people coming at 7 p.m.? If they came at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., they would see what it takes to reset the store up for the next day. Because a lot of places, especially like mall stores, that's after work. Those can be your busiest hours. So like they would be seeing a different peak and the store's kind of a mess and everyone's scrambling and they'd have a real sense of like, wow, this is what it takes to like run this business.
I feel like all of our discussions up until now have talked about the field experience as a whole, as a collective. Like we talk about a lot about corporate versus stores, but just recently I came across some funny videos of basically retail folks making fun of if they're a closer, openers, and if they're an opener, then closer. So I asked you about it real quick via message, and you said it's a whole thing.
It is a whole thing.
And now I want to learn more about it and what nuance we can get into that we haven't yet by digging, double clicking on the store team. So I got to know, first things first, how do you identify as an opener or a closer?
You know, it's really funny. I didn't think you were going to ask this question. I don't know why I didn't think it. I have a soft spot. I think as I've been a manager so long, I don't really view myself as one or the other. I kind of go where needed. I have a soft spot for closers. Like if I had to pick a team, it's team closer. And that as a manager is probably a really hot take. I think most managers would identify with openers.
Interesting. All right, so how does this happen? You've got two groups of people working in the same building, doing what I assume are a lot of the same activities, the same job for the same company, but it sounds like they reliably end up resenting each other. What's going on?
Such a loaded question. So I think there's a couple of layers here. One is, but I'm not going to let this derail the conversation, but I just want to mention it at the top, which is obviously these companies have pulled back payroll. It has made both teams run on less. But I want to say, as someone who's been in retail for the last 20 years, even when I was younger, and I would argue payroll was not as tight as it is now, it was still a thing. Even when we had ample people, it was still a thing. It was never not a thing. So, like, while I think payroll is a factor, it's not the thing. Like, you give stores all the payroll in the world, openers and closers, that dichotomy still exists. So there's that. And I think in retail, depending on what type of retail you work in, both teams are doing actually a very different job. So you made the comment like same team, same job, same, and true. But I'd say I don't want to say the only, but the biggest overlap is obviously customer service, right? Like we're all doing that. But in terms of actual like tasking, like operational tasking, it's quite different. And actually, I would argue that there are some people who are great openers, terrible closers, and vice versa. So in clothing, I'm going to use two examples because I think it's important to illustrate that even though they're different, they're the same. So in clothing, you're probably coming in, you're assessing what was or wasn't done the night before. So it starts right out the gate. Like 30 seconds into your day, you're already like, huh, all right, this is what they left us. Then you're maybe adjusting those things. So maybe there's like sweaters on a table that need to be folded. There's different things that are not hung right or sized, so you're fixing that. But then there's the other things to get the day ready, right? So you're probably doing any BOPUS orders that have come in. Obviously, that's a newer thing in the grand scheme of retail. Maybe there's a shipment team coming in. That's kind of a separate team. I wouldn't count them as openers. They're kind of like in their own world. That's a whole other conversation. Like backroom versus front of house. We could do that episode too. Um,
Okay.
so there's that. And they're really the setter. They're setting up the day, right? Like they set the tone. And some people, I would actually argue, are better at setting the tone than closing out the day. Because closing out the day is kind of like cleaning up, you know, a lot of the folding that needs to happen, and resetting the store for the next day. So it's a reset. You've got like sort of the setup and the reset. And in food service, very similar, right? Like Starbucks, you're prepping all of that iced coffee that you're going to go through. The store that I worked at, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe we went through somewhere like 25 gallons of iced coffee a day. So it's like you're making all of that iced coffee. It's not leftover from the day before. You don't carry over iced coffee. So you're making that iced coffee. You're making all those iced teas. You're making all the bases for all the things. But the closers, who do you think has to clean all those containers? So there is this sort of, it's why I have a soft spot for closers, because there's this duality where I feel like openers kind of like set the tone, but where everything gets lost, in my opinion, this is the topic that we don't really dig into enough, is the middle of the day. So I feel personally like a lot of openers in general, the first 3 hours of the day, super productive. They're setting up the day, they're doing the thing, they're getting ready. And then the last 3 hours a day, the closers are like hustling, they're like folding the tables, they're trying to, take out the trash, they're trying to do all the things to reset. The middle of the day, when both teams are still there, is where the openers and closers really, the battle is really happening.
What's happening? Yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
so from my perspective, like, because I've had this battle as a manager, how many times do you think people have come to me and been like, and I could tell that so and so closed last night because the thing, this wasn't done and this wasn't done. And in my head, I'm like, you worked with that person for 4 hours yesterday
Right.
because you left at 3 and they came in at 12. Well, okay, that's 3 hours. So, but like you worked with them for 3 hours. You couldn't tell them in that 3 hours, hey, so I notice you sometimes when you close, you forget this thing. So that's where the openers and closers things gets lost on me a little bit as a manager, because I think there's opportunity in the middle of the day to not only address these things, but come to an agreement. Like at Starbucks, actually, for example, I made all my shift managers sign a document, low key insane of me, but sign a document, like literally John Hancock with the date. And it was agreement. What was the minimum that we would expect from the openers before they left for the day? Like, what
Right.
would they do versus what was the minimum that the closers had to do? What were the absolute non negotiables? And I basically said to them, once you sign this document, if you come into your shift and the minimum standards are met, you are not allowed to complain anymore because we collectively agreed on this and we negotiated that document a lot. Um, and so, because the issue becomes, and again, why I have a soft spot for closers is openers set up the day, but sometimes can leave the day and leave the store not in good place, right? Like, and they can get away with it because let's say you're in a clothing store. I won't even use food service. Let's say you're at American Eagle and it's super busy in the middle of the day. Customers are trashing tables. Well, if the opener is leaving at 3, they're leaving at 3 or 2 or whatever they're leaving at. And they're just going to be like, well, it was busy. I couldn't keep up with all the whatever. But then when they come in the next morning, they're like, they couldn't fix it all. And it's like, as it is in a lot of retailers, the aforementioned one included, you don't leave until it's clean. So like you want people to stay till midnight, but you got to leave at 3. Like we don't force openers to stay if they haven't met some sort of like minimum thing. And we would never. That's kind of crazy, which is also why it's crazy that we make closers do it. Like that's my hot take everywhere. Closers should be allowed to leave when their legal shift ends. And if the store is on the floor, so be it. That's just the way it is. Um, so yeah, I think a lot of the battle though is because there isn't sort of this agreed upon standard at certain times. The only standard is when we close, this is what it should look like. There's no
Right.
middle of the day standard. Um, so I think that's adding to it. I also think as managers, like one of the issues is like you really need to flip people sometimes. I'm not saying schedule them outside of their availability. I'm saying offer your team the opportunity to work the opposite shift, to learn what that is like,
Right.
because that will go a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. So clarity. It sounded like clarity of expectations wasn't completely there, and you made it very explicit.
Hmm.
Tell me about the negotiations. What was the most surprising or contentious point, and what should be an openers versus closer responsibility?
Well, so honestly, what was the most fascinating about it is it wasn't even actually openers versus closers. It was realizing that of the two or three people that were like just openers, basically, because here's the
Mhm.
thing, the easiest shift managers to negotiate in that were the people who did both. So the people who
Right.
both open shifts and close shifts, they were like the most malleable in terms of expectations. The people who only did I just open or I just close were the most like staunch in their like, this is how it should be. But the thing that was actually more fascinating than that was realizing we all come into work with our own internalized expectations of other people that, if not verbalized, turn into resentment. Because some of the things, for example, that openers wanted were tiny things. And I mean really tiny. And you're like, wow, this is like really like getting to you that this thing isn't done. It takes 10 seconds, which is also why closers probably sometimes are like, okay, if I'm going to skip anything, that's what I'll skip because it's 10 seconds.
Right.
But realizing that at 4:45 a.m., when someone comes in, that one thing could be the thing they see and they're like, oh, another thing I have to do. So it was really interesting because some of them were like easy gets. Like it was like, okay, closers, like we just have to do these little tweaks. And that was more the fascinating thing. Same thing with the closers. Like it was like, and if openers before they leave, like if they could just like do this, and you're like, that takes 2 seconds. Okay, like no worry. Like that's the thing that this is why we're doing this. It's not even like a lot of the bigger things. It is the little things because the little things like sort of add up over time. If every day, um, if every day someone's doing the same, so for example, at Starbucks, I need to be more explicit. So at Starbucks at night, you leave, the tea pitchers to brew tea the next day, like clean, obviously, out on the counter. And one of the things that the openers wanted were like, make sure that the spigot is closed. Because at 4:45 in the morning, if I go to pour boiling water in there, I might forget it's open. And then you have boiling water over the counter. And everyone who's ever worked at Starbucks has done that at least 5 times. So we all know that that's annoying, but it's like that thing for a closer takes 3 seconds. And you're already washing the dishes, so you're already like running water through it, so you already know when it's closed or open. So for you, it's not even like a big thing. So it wasn't even like people were like, oh my God, there wasn't enough this or that. The other thing that we landed on was actually not even just about doing things, it was just about better communication. So if you can't make, say, whipped cream, putting on the counter all the whipped cream canisters empty, sort of as a signal, you got to make whipped cream and you got to make it right now. As opposed to realizing in your first hour, like, oh my God, I only have one canister left. So some of it wasn't even like you can't leave until you do the thing. It was also we need a signal that priorities are different on this morning. Um, and then for openers into closers, it was a lot of like making sure, because obviously closers aren't going to call the openers and be like, I'm about to leave. What do you want done? But the closers do have the opportunity with openers to say, hey, before you leave, can you take out the trash? Like, can you whatever? So we agreed that no opener would ever leave without asking, and that no closer would lie and say that they were fine if they were not fine. Um, so relationship management 101.
Communication. Yeah. Yeah. Did that help? Did that make a difference having that document and that clarity?
It did. I think the other thing that helped, though, honestly, and I remember at Starbucks being in a district meeting with store managers and getting a lot of flack. This is why I say most store managers would say that they're openers. because in most retail brands, well, not most, but in like Starbucks, for example, opening is the busiest time. Uh, and so that's viewed as the most important. Uh, but the thing is about Starbucks is if you have 7 people opening, that's a good amount. I would have loved 8 most days, but during peak. But then you only have 3 closing, and those closers have to do all the cleaning while still serving clients. Like you can't be like, we're just cleaning. But it's not like the openers are doing that same level of tasking and service. It's like very service focused. So once you close, you're doing this like weird split personality thing. And so I remember being at a district meeting and saying something about how closing was harder. You would have thought I said like a racial slur. Like you would have thought I said something completely crazy because the way everyone's head like whipped to the side towards me and was like, that's a crazy statement. Like closing so easy. And I remember being like, well, at my store, because what I did when we first had the battle was I decided to close 4 nights a week, which is like a lot for a store manager to do. And so I closed 4 nights a week and I was like, this is awful. Like, I just remember being like, this is stressful. Like, in a way that opening, it's not that opening isn't, but opening was stressful at Starbucks in a different way. It's about how busy you're getting, but you're
Mhm.
still focused on this, like, the customer. Like, but at night, you're like, oh my God, I have so much to clean, but also, oh my God, another woman's coming in for a hot chocolate. Like, please, everyone just go away for like 5 minutes so I can get something done. So there's that pressure. So having the non-negotiables helped. Having me working closing helped because also I said to shift managers, you can now be mad at me, uh, and then you can tell me what's wrong and what's a non-negotiable. But it also helped that I was able to then tell the closers because they liked me, and I was able to use that goodwill to be like, hey, listen, when you open and you don't do this, it really is annoying, and here's why. And I, like most things in management, I do a lot of storytelling and a lot of like joking and like I would literally role play for them what it was like coming in at 4:45. Like I would literally walk behind the counter like haphazardly, like I was tired, and then you come over here, and then the spoon isn't in the thing, and then you're like, oh, this day is gonna be terrible. Like I would just be so dramatic, and I would make them laugh, but that would help them be like, okay, like we get it. Like I also at because also most closers they're not waking up at 4:45 a.m. They're night people. So when you explain that to them, they're like, ah, got it. Um, but yeah, it didn't like cure everything, but at least helped us be a little bit more consistent with each other.
It's so common, I think, when there's any kind of uncertainty, to make up stories about why something is or isn't happening. And it
Mhm.
sounds like they would always just make up they're lazy, they don't care, they don't get it, that, as opposed to it's actually just really different and there's a ton of stuff to do. And I don't know. But yeah, that's like the stories we tell ourselves about other people that we work with when they do something that's annoying.
Mhm.
And then those things become like triggers, right? For like symbolic of how inept this other group is.
Inept, or sometimes like people just actually read like maliciousness into things that aren't that way.
Yeah.
Um, and because, there were certain things the closing team was forgetting like almost every night. And they were like, oh, it's because blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it is malicious, though. I did find out at some point that some of the closers weren't doing certain things because the openers weren't doing certain things. So they were like, well, this is my like retribution. And the thing
Right.
that we haven't mentioned yet in this episode is that
Mm.
one of the things that makes retail and food service really interesting is for the most part, they're open most days of the year. And why that's important to mention in openers versus closers is this is like a never ending loop. There's no like pause. The only
Mhm.
time you have a pause, and this is what can get interesting, is if you have, like in Massachusetts, a lot of stores are open shorter hours on Sundays. Or if you have holiday hours on a certain time, where there's certain times where openers and closers become each other, like become like all the openers and all the closers are the whole shift. Those are
Mhm.
your only opportunities really to like have everyone see everything all together at once. But otherwise, retail is running, say 363 or 4 days a year. And so if you come into a store and you have a hardcore openers versus closers, it's not like you can time out. We're going to pause everything. No, no, the business is still going. We're opening and then we're closing. We're opening and then we're closing. And so stopping this in its tracks is not quite, you don't get that opportunity. It's like you got to fix the engine of the train while the train's still going. You don't get to stop it. It's not stopping. And so I think that's what makes this battle so hard to fix and makes it just continuous because it's going to keep going unless someone is like, okay, I've figured out how to be the engineer and like fix the engine while we're moving.
Yeah. Huh. Does the shift assignment signal anything? Is it just by preference? Or is it just hired by someone who's like, I don't like to get up early, so I'm a closer, or I'm someone who likes to have my evenings free, or blah blah blah, so I'm an opener, or is there something else?
So it's interesting that you asked that because I think retail is in this like really interesting moment where it's like having a battle with itself. Because old school retail says, so I can't even believe this ever existed. But old school retail is like you have to have open availability, or like we want the most open availability that you can possibly have. It's basically like we would like it if your whole life is devoted to this minimum wage job. Crazy. Crazy. And so that when in those days it really was maybe preference but also maybe skill level, right? Like and different skills. So like let's say someone's good at opening credit cards. Maybe they're a closer because that's when your store is the busiest and you want them to get the most credit cards. Maybe someone's an insane like denim wall folder, which is like a skill that should be more paid, personally, because I can't do it. My denim walls, they're looking fine. But they're not like those like picture where everything's like it's not that. And so like those people, maybe they're openers actually, not closers, because I mean, they could be closers, but maybe they're openers so that they can like reset when you're doing floor sets and like changing over a whole floor. At Starbucks, obviously, maybe you're like more meticulous cleaner, and so you're a closer. Maybe you're the best, fastest barista, so you're an opener, so you can be. So it is like a mix of like preference, skill. Those things are all kind of intertwined. But now, as we shift and retailers are realizing, wait, work life balance actually kind of matters. This is something we should take into account. A lot of retailers are getting into this place where they're trying to give people set schedules or very close to a set schedule, a predictable schedule, I think they're calling it. Which us managers, shout out us, because there's a lot of us. I'm not saying it's just me. We've been doing this for like over a decade. Like we recognize that like this is how you retain people. Like this is not rocket science. This is not hard things to figure out. But retail is a slow moving beast and they realize things and they're like, oh my God, we're so smart. Um, it's like they've figured out the most basic human thing. Anyway, so they're doing this predictive scheduling. So now it really is going to be more about people's preference, probably. And I think the only time that that will probably change is if, like at Starbucks, if you had someone who was a really slow barista, but they wanted to be an opener, you kind of had to have a hard conversation of like, listen, you need to step it in high gear, have another shot of espresso if you want to be here at 7 a.m. when we're getting, 70 orders every half hour. Um, think about that the next time you're at Starbucks and you're complaining about wait times, people. 70 orders. That's not 70 drinks, that's 70 orders. I just want to, you write that down. So, um, so I think it's very complicated. I think it's very different depending on stores. And I do think, though, that some of it is like a little bit inevitable, the openers versus closers. And I
Mhm.
think, and I'm kind of probably jumping to the conclusion here, but I do think that as managers, one of the goals is like, how do we have some healthy competition? I think healthy competition is great. Like,
Right.
how do we create openers and closers and like who can be the most proud of what they're doing on their shift and be a little competitive versus like that us versus them. Like I think there's a way to make that happen in a healthy way where people still get to be like, do you see that? Because I've had this happen and I had it happen at Starbucks where people would come in to close and they'd be like, did you see the clothes we left you last night? Yeah. You didn't have to do anything this morning. We did it all. Like, and it becomes like a point of pride of like,
Mm.
look how good we are. Like, I bet you can't set us up as good as we set you up. And that's where you really get the momentum of like a really strong team that's like vibing well and is
Mhm.
like proud of what they're doing versus the let's see who can like skip something the most to like really get at them. Um, like how do you flip that on its head? Which takes months, by the way, just so we're clear.
Well, yeah. So to that point, I'm curious to know more about especially closers' relationship to leadership,
Mm.
corporate. As so, if you're a closer, you just inherently have less face time with your manager?
Yeah. And that's well, that's the funny part about working at Starbucks. Me closing so much, literally several of the team commented they were like, we've never had a manager here with us this much. Like
Yeah.
get to know us, like who we are, like guide us, also like do the things they're doing. Like I'm cleaning the bathroom. I'm scrubbing those floor drains. My floor drains, the best floor drains you've ever seen. Like I'm getting in there. And it's just so we're clear, floor drains are disgusting. Like we're talking milk scum, syrup, the rehydrated, dehydrated strawberries from those shaken things that Starbucks has. Like, it's gross. It's disgusting. And I'm getting in there without gloves just to prove a point. Like, I'm just going in. But anyway, it's like they never had that, and
Right.
you didn't ask directly, but you threw like the corporate thing in there, and I think this is
Yeah.
important. They're also the ones in every company, whether it's clothing, food service, doesn't matter, who are missing a lot of the communication.
Yes.
So if you're an opener, right, your manager's coming in, maybe your manager's already there because they're like doing their office stuff. They get an email that's like, communicate to your team XYZ. They're immediately going to the floor or some point in their day and they're like, hey, everybody, just so you know, we're starting this new initiative or we're doing this new thing. This is happening. And here's the thing, and I've done this, so like I'm not calling out anyone. If anything, like put the mirror in front of my face. I've done the thing where I'm like, well, I told so many people, everyone must know.
Yeah.
But what about the person who works 5 to 9:30 4 nights a week? Did that person find out the new thing? Or are they going to find out 2 weeks after everybody else and then be like, wait, everybody already knew? Why did no one tell me? Why wasn't it?
Yeah.
And now you risk disengaging the person who, yeah, maybe they only work 12 hours a week, but maybe they're the best like store recovery person and they fold really well and they're really reliable. They work every like Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. They're like that person on the schedule you just love with your whole heart because you don't have to move them ever. They're just there like a locked in block. But now you've risked disengaging them because this isn't the first time they're the last to know something. This is like the 12th time. And I have done that as a manager. And I've actually had, luckily, good enough relationships with some people like that who will call me out and be like, Matt, this is like the 10th time. And their thing is, you left at 6. We had an hour together. Why didn't you tell me? And because in my brain, I'm like, I told so many people. It felt like I told everyone. Which personally, this is a very like archaic system I have, but personally, everywhere I've ever worked now, like for the last like probably 8 years, I keep a staff list that's literally staff list, and then it's columns, and then I add in like things in the columns like new folding standards, new drink recipe, whatever. And then I check off every time I tell the person. And that way I know who I missed because my brain, I don't think anyone's brain is that reliable to know with certainty, okay, I've communicated to everyone. And that way too, I can also set the standard of like, no, no, I checked my little box. I told you. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, I think you make a really good point. I think closers are often like these people, especially the late closers. So not like a full-time closer, because a full-time closer is going to come in midday. But a part-time closer, they're going to come in probably after most leadership has left. Not just the store manager, but maybe the shipment manager, the visual manager, like all those people are long gone.
Right.
Which is another problem I have with retail, actually. Like I really think, and it's not that I don't think managers deserve work-life balance or like a steady schedule, but I do think that some people have it overly cushy. I'm looking at you, visual managers. I don't think you should be able to work Monday through Friday, 6 to 2, and just like get out of the busiest parts of the business. It's not fair. Yes, we didn't redress that mannequin at Saturday on noon because we didn't have time. If you'd like to come in on Saturday and redress your own damn mannequin, feel free. That's my plug for that. So it's like I do think that store managers, for example, you don't have to close all the time, but you
Right.
should sometimes see not just to see those people, but to see what the business look like. And don't be doing that thing that happened so many times to me at American Eagle. And I'm calling you out here on the podcast. We're friends, but I'm calling you out, Emily. She listens to this, so she's gonna hear her name. Don't do that thing where you're closing a retail store and you give yourself an extra closer because you're the store manager because you make the schedule. Don't do it. Because then you'll have an unrealistic vision of what closing looks like, and you're holding people to a standard they cannot reach because you had an extra person. They're like, well, when I close, it's like you walk, notice how it's perfect because you had like 12 extra hours of payroll. Let's be so for real right now. So close and do so the way you ask other people to close. And if it's uncomfortable, the way it was for me at Starbucks, one of the first things I did was have to shift the schedule a little bit and steal a little bit from the openers, not a whole person, just shift someone a little bit later so that they had coverage for breaks. So it wasn't two people on the floor like scrambling. And it was a micro adjustment that openers barely noticed, minus one person. One person, he was very like, we need that person. And I'm like, you're fine. Um, and so that's something to also pay attention to.
Yeah. Well, because when you were talking about, a healthy rivalry, uh, and the closer thinking like, look how great I left this place for you. I was wondering what the incentive is. If they don't have a leader necessarily, or they don't interact with a leader to say, hey, great job, or they don't get to see the impact of their work necessarily the next day, they just come back to a mess the next day. um, what is like, how can corporate or managers incentivize that person? And I think you made a part of the way not to do it is leaving them out of communications, making them already feel like they're not part of this thing.
Hmm.
Is a huge one. And I mean, side note, it's wild that it is up to you to verbally tell everything to your entire teams.
Well, so I think, and I mean, that's like we've talked about this on other episodes, and I
Hmm.
don't think there's an easy answer. Like, I think this is
Yep.
one of those things that like no one has figured out because there isn't an easy answer.
Yep.
Technology could be part of the answer. The problem is no one has figured out how to make technology part of the solution without requiring people to have the technology on their own devices. And
Right.
that is a problem. One, because a lot of states have rules against it. And two, your part timer is not downloading an app for work.
Yep.
Like, please, like, again, be so for real.
Hmm.
Um, so it's like, again, and I've said it 1,000 times, and I'm going to say it again. Here's my pitch. Maybe to even Zipline, who again, I've mentioned before and I love.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's like, why isn't there a system where people punch in and then automatically it's like, you can't go to the floor? Like, it's not going to let you fully get out of the screen until you
Yep.
read the communication. Like,
Yeah.
why isn't that already a thing? I'm just making that up right now on the fly. People sit in offices for hours trying to come up with how we communicate. There it is. You can take it for free. I don't even want the money. I just want my job to be easier. Like, just take it.
Right.
Um, but yeah, one of the ways is obviously not, to give people the communication they need. But I think also you have to incentivize your whole team to reinforce each other's positive behavior.
Yeah.
It cannot just be from managers. And I've actually said this to employees directly. Listen, I can tell people till I'm blue in the face that they're doing a great job. Actually, a lot of times people want to hear it from their peer. Like, they
Yeah.
really want to hear from a peer, like, wow, that was great. Thank you. You killed it. That goes a long way. And I also think you need to beat out of your team with whatever means necessary. Um, and I've had to do this everywhere I've ever worked. All the people who work for you that are like, well, I'm not saying that because like they should just do their job. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's not how most people work. So, Margaret, you need to like open your mouth and say thank you. And if you can't say thank you, you don't belong on this team because that is not the culture that we're trying to have here. And I think you need to be that direct. Like, this is not the culture we're trying to create. We're trying to create a culture where we give each other props when we deserve it and we give each other honest feedback when we need it. And if you think everyone should just like do their job, you belong in an individual contributor role in an office where you're never going to work with people because that is the only realistic way you're ever going to get that.
Fair point. I'm going to, I want to follow this thread of how things align with some of the corporate challenges we've talked about.
Mhm.
So, for example, what support is available to closers? So, after everyone from corporate has gone home, what if they have a challenge with tech, like an IT issue or a maintenance or something like that?
Depends on the brand, but most places now have some sort of like emergency phone number.
Okay.
Um, or people just call their manager.
Yeah.
I mean, luckily for me, a lot of places I've worked lately have had like some sort of emergency thing, and then it's just training your team what to do in that moment and not to call you because
Mhm.
it's like, "Well, I'm just going to tell you to call the number." Like,
Yeah.
so don't call me. I mean, the only time call me is if you know I have the answer quicker than they have the answer, like because it's something I've
Mhm.
dealt with, then maybe, maybe call me. Um, but if it's something I cannot help you with from remotely, like a tech issue, like just call the tech number. But
Mhm.
you also have to, again, and this involves communication, do they know where those resources are?
Right.
Or did you only communicate that to all the people who are on the opening shift and now the
Yeah.
closers are like, what do we do? Who do we call? Um, and
Right.
so that kind of is also part of the communication problem.
Yeah. How about store visits? Do closers ever get store visits from execs or DMs?
I I want to use this moment right now to preamble a future episode about you not working in retail. I'm going to use this moment because it's that exact question that is important. It should be an obvious question to everyone working in retail, but everyone in retail who listens to this is going to hear you ask that and be like, is she dumb? Because no, of course not. I don't think a
Mhm.
closer's ever gotten a visit in their life. Um, the only because here's the thing. Let's say they're doing a big visit, like a big jet trip. Um, I love when I tell you that term. But so they're doing a big jet trip, and there's 8 executives coming, and they're all walking in the store. Let's say they plan to go to 5 stores that day. If they're running behind, they don't show up at 7 p.m. They just got that store off the list. They're like, oh, your store's not getting visited. We're getting back on the jet. We don't work past 6 p.m. Get out of here. And so that's also why closers, and that question you just asked rolls into a lot, right? Because that means also sometimes closers don't understand the intensity that openers have or managers have towards prep. Maybe until there's a visit and they're prepping for it, but then they prep for the visit and they don't get the reward of seeing how happy the CEO or whoever is. And, maybe the next night they're like, oh my God, how did it go? And then the worst case scenario is they're like, oh, we got cut from the list because they're not coming here after 6 p.m. So like that question you're asking is such a good question because like, why aren't corporate people coming at 7 p.m. to see? Because also, if they came at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., they would see what it takes to reset the store up for the next day. Because a lot of places, especially like mall stores, that's after work. Those can be your busiest hours. So like they would be seeing a different peak and the store's kind of a mess and everyone's scrambling and they'd have a real sense of like, wow, this is what it takes to like run this business. So I just want to reiterate again for me, you, and everyone, this is why we actually need people who don't work in retail to ask questions because all the people in retail, apparently all the way going decades back, aren't asking these questions because we assume they're not worth asking or because we've already decided it's just never going to happen. So why say the thing out loud? But it's a good question. It deserves to be answered and not even by me. I shouldn't even be the one to answer that question. Someone who's much higher than me should have to answer that question. And your answer shouldn't be, well, we got to get back on the jet. Like,
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, thank you, by the way. um, it sounds like corporate is completely blind to the closer experience,
mhm.
except for maybe how it impacts the daytime experience. But do you think they're making that connection?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know that certain like regional, maybe VP people have gone into stores at closing time to shop. So they've seen
Mhm.
stores, you know, on their off day or like whatever.
Mhm.
And I've heard people say like, "Oh my God, they saw the store, um, and they were like upset." And I'm like, "Well, they saw reality." Because the thing is, most retail mall stores, this isn't every mall store. Every store is different. Every state is different. Every country is different. But on average, when they come at noon, that is not the peak time to be buying denim.
Yeah.
Like, they're seeing some stay-at-home moms returning things they bought online. They're seeing some like random like construction worker come in on his break and buy a new pair of socks. Like,
Mhm.
and then they're like, wow, the store is so clean, everyone's so friendly, everything's fine. I'm like, this isn't peak though. And Starbucks, to their credit, because the peak is in the morning, they do see some of the peak business, but then they don't see how you recover from it. So it's like the opposite problem, but still a problem because you're not
Mhm.
seeing, because that also means though that scheduling wise, we're not looking at payroll models to plan for closers appropriately.
Right.
And most companies, Old Navy did this, Starbucks does this, a couple other companies I can think of do this, where they want you to use most of your hours during peak time. And it's sort of like, the scheduling program will get angry at you if you try to like move it too far away from the peak time. But the
Mhm.
problem is like we've almost because that will maximize dollars, which is true, it will. More people when there's more customers will help you. But it's almost like we just pretend that all the other operational labor doesn't exist.
Mhm.
We're like, well, we don't need 4 people then because we only see 5 people per hour. Okay, sure. But when we were seeing 100 people per hour and everyone was customer servicing and helping them, the store's now falling apart. So, like, what about the recovery?
Yeah, so it is like it's a big important part of the story that it seems like is missing from the narrative in a lot of corporate leaders' minds. It sounds like.
Mhm. That's why I'm team closer. Because I think because I think it's vastly under-resourced in most companies and
Right.
underappreciated by not only openers, by management in general, because also managers aren't even there most of the time.
Mhm.
Like they have some, and it's not even an assistant manager who's there half the time. It's like a key holder who just got promoted, who we saw promise in, who's like bearing the burden of a lot. And then
Mhm.
we wonder why that level of leadership burns out the fastest. Almost everywhere I've worked, that layer of leadership, much harder to retain than an ASM or a store manager. Much harder.
Do you think it's because, and I guess it varies by brand. I guess are some brands, do they have their busiest hours during closer shifts?
So when I was at Old Navy, my store like specifically, our
Mhm.
last 2 hours could be our busiest. Could be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, a lot of the tasks were in the morning. Shipment was in the morning, price change
Right.
was in the morning to change signs, visual adjustments had to be done before you're open. So the payroll you had was still being like allocated more towards the morning
Mhm.
because they looked at that like 2 hour bump and they were like, well, those like people can handle it. Like, there's no reason to put a whole other person just for that like 1 or 2 hours. So for that 1 or 2 hours, you just have to like deal.
Interesting. As we wrap up, if I could ask one final question. You said early at the start of this episode, you said there are closing standards for sure, but there's no middle of the day standard. If there was, because it sounds like that could be pretty clutch in relieving the tension to at least make it a healthy camaraderie type of rivalry, what might that look like?
I think every company, honestly, is different. And
Mhm.
I think it would have to be negotiated between
Mhm.
openers and closers. What is it that we need middle of the day to look like? And you could make it fun. It doesn't have to be, some uh arduous list of things to do that you aren't looking forward to. It could be even a team effort. Okay, from 1 to 2 every day, we all go around and make sure these 10 things are done, maybe together even. It doesn't matter how it gets done, but I do think every store is going to be different. And because I think even within the same company, every store is going to be different, right? Because if your busiest times are in the afternoon, maybe then some of that negotiating is like, you have to replen the floor early in the day. Can't happen at night.
Mhm.
Maybe you have to make sure there's no go backs in the fitting room before anyone leaves because the fitting room is going to get trashed later in the day. So if you even start with 10 items before the openers leave, you're going to have 100 by the time you close. So, like, let's get on top of that now. So, I think every company and every store would be different depending on the business. But I think what's important is that it's agreed upon by that team. So, I don't think it's something corporate could come up with. I think it's something every store team has to sort of agree with. And that's also where corporate standards need to be more flexible to individual stores' needs and business ebbs and flows.
Yeah. All right. Final thought for me, and then follow up question for you. I've seen a lot of employee engagement survey data, and I've seen it spliced in many different ways to try and give corporate a clearer idea of who maybe they're underserving, et cetera. I've never seen that data spliced by opener and closer. Have you?
No.
Seems like it could be really, really interesting.
I think it would be interesting for opener, closer, or stock, like maybe even three ways,
Mhm.
so that you could see if there's a pattern in one category. Like, are all the
Yeah.
openers saying, I feel communication in my store is great? Like, are all of them saying that? And all the closers are saying it's bad?
Yeah.
Because then the solutions look different, right? Then you're not doing that thing where you're like, we need another poster. Because the answer isn't
Exactly.
another poster. The answer is, how do we communicate this to these five closers? or the backroom team or whatever the case may be. So I think you're onto something with splitting the data.
Interesting. I learned so much. Any final thoughts, Matt?
No, but I do think that well, I'm saying no and then I'm saying something. So yes, which is just, I think a lot of our themes lately, regardless of what we're talking about, whether it be store teams or corporate or things, all come down to like, how is communication in your company, in your store, in your business, throughout your shifts? Like it all seemingly feels like it's being funneled into that. And again, the answer is not another poster.
Amen. All right. Thanks as always, Matt.
Thank you.
You're listening to Dear Corporate, Love Stores.